I'm going to be talking to you today about the experiences of discrimination in the educational system from superiors. So this is coming from a larger study on Canadian youth mental health conducted by Dr. Jour and his partners. It's coming similar from the same study that was just presented by Atharina. So what happened is we got the interviews and we did more of an exploratory analysis. We started grabbing themes that were really coming out from the youth. They weren't necessarily directly related to the questions that were being asked, but they were related to what are the youth saying and what's important to the youth. And one of the things that came out was this great experience of discrimination within the educational system. So just as an introduction, coming from the literature, I will preface that I'm not an expert in this field. I am a PhD candidate studying youth homelessness and an expert in qualitative research. So that's how I came onto this project. And I have a great honor from Jour to be presenting today with a lot of experts in the room. So you probably all know a lot more about this topic than I do. But understanding Black racism in the school context there's this overarching exclusion coming from teachers, from other students, from career counselors, and higher superiors. And this is found in recent literature, as well as something that's going to come up in the results that I'm going to present today. They also experience daily encounters in the classroom and the school environment. And there's extraction from learning environment, so being taken out of the classroom for X, Y, and Z reasons. So where does this leave youth when they're in the classroom? It leaves them feeling like they aren't able to be educated. It leaves them feeling like they're being worthy of exclusion. And that's really a damperment for the youth of between the ages of 16 to 24, who that's a critical period of time of development and self-development in who you are. So again, repeating the sample demographics that Atharina mentioned, it was 32 interviews, 32 youth between the ages of 20 to 24, primarily between the ages of 20 to 24. So majority had already completed high school, and it was also a majority of a female population. So the experiences that they talk about in the interviews are mainly from a high school perspective. As I'm sharing, it won't be quotes on the screen, but there was a few examples from a post-secondary context as well. So coming from the themes, there was two major themes that built up. It was the assumption of Black student performance, and the actions and inactions of facilitating racism in the school. So we're going to go through each of the sub-themes here. So the presumption of low academic performance, the lessening of academic expectations, enablement of a growing racist environment, the non-intervention, and the isolation of Black students. So on the first theme, the presumption of low academic performance, there's a quote here. It's kind of like it was always clear that the system was putting all the Black kids in the lower tier classes. So if we look at the educational system in Ontario, I can speak to that, and I'm not sure if it's the same across the board in other provinces, but there's usually in high school 2 tiers of classes. There's a lower tier and a higher tier. When I was in high school, it was described as a college and university is how we described it. And I'm not sure if that's the same everywhere else. But they were always told that they were put into lower level courses. And this wasn't based on their academic standing. They were stating that even when they were performing well in the class, they would stay in those lower academic classes. When their white counterparts did a little bit better, they would be bumped up. So they saw this as an unequal opportunity where people weren't actually engaging with their educational attainment. And they described it as just creating a reputation for themselves, that the teachers and the school system was creating this false reputation that students of the Black community were to be achieving lower academic standards. So that leads to the second sub-theme of lower expectations for Black students. So it's a long quote here, and I'm going to leave it up for a second. But it's just a story of one of the students who was in class, in a grade 12 chemistry class, and they were discussing how they needed a little bit of help. They were struggling with a certain concept, and they asked the teacher if they could get some extra help on this topic. And what happened was that the teacher just immediately said, "I think you should go to a lower course." And tried to bump them down to the lower level course. When their white counterpart friend, and this is how they describe the story, asked for similar help, stating that they were just having difficulty, the teacher gladly helped them. So there was different support that was provided to students, and it was very aware to the students the difference in treatment that they were receiving. So, and as previously mentioned, just like when they were in the lower level courses, they were never able to be bumped up. But it's the same when they were talking to career counselors in school, when they were talking about wanting to go to university and wanting to pursue higher education, they would be told, okay, maybe you should consider college instead. And this was never related to their academic performance. Whether they were really high achieving students, it was always that turn of events of you should pursue a lower level. And they were never complaining about it, saying that these college degrees are lower than university, but they were saying that they wanted to go to a university, and they were being dismissed and stating to go to something that didn't require as much pressure to apply to. And then so our second major theme here is the inaction and action facilitating racism. So there was an able environment of a racist environment. So one student was sharing a story on the schoolyard where she said, someone was saying that if a black person touches you, you'll become Black. And this was said by another student in the schoolyard. This was then reported to a teacher and to the principal, stating that there is racism going on in the schoolyard where they feel like they aren't safe, and nothing was done. They said, okay, just play somewhere else. And then we also had environments where this was coming from in the classroom. It wasn't just the school environment, it was coming directly from the teachers as well. So this quote here, my French teacher, we were talking about, I don't remember what we were talking about, but he basically was defending the white person's right to say the N-word in like a positive way. Yeah. And I rose my eyes, I rose my hand, and I was like, why would you say that? Like, the N-word is racist, and in no context should it be ever be used by a white person or a non-Black person. And then the story followed by there being an argument between the teacher and the student. And I should context that the teacher was white. And he was defending everyone's right to use this word. And that there was, even though there was no context to be saying it, that the individual who's defending his point of view of being offended by this comment, his personal experience of being offended, was being completely dismissed by the classroom and the teacher and the other students. So it was really discouraging for the individuals, and this wasn't the only experience by a teacher or a career counselor that students explained to in the interviews. And then for non-intervention. So again, as I mentioned with the first comment, the first quote, I'm not going to read this one because it's a little bit long, but I'll leave time for pictures. But there'd be individuals, whether it was coming from the schoolyard or from teachers or counselors, where they'd say comments that were racist comments, and it would be reported. And time again, interview after interview after interview, it was never something that seemed to have a solution. Students always talked about how this was never approached. The people in power were never talking about how can we address this? How can we make people feel safe in the classroom? So this was a really important aspect to the youth when they were discussing in the interviews of not feeling safe in their school, which is supposed to be one of the #1 places that youth feel safe in. And then there was also the talk about isolation of Black students. So this quote here, it shows the story of a young Black girl who was saying that she was in a school, and she did discuss that she was the only Black person in her classroom. And once a week, she would be pulled out of the classroom, and it would be told to the classroom that she was going to to a psychologist. And she didn't know why she was going. She never asked to go. She was just being pulled out of the classroom and told to go. And every week she would be there and she'd be like, I don't know why I'm here. And then be like, okay, did you lose your dad? Or are you living in a poor environment? And she's like, no, I'm happy. My family is great, like is doing well. Everything is going well. I don't know why I'm being pulled out of class every time. So she's losing out on her experience of education while also being isolated in front of her peers. She described this as a little bit embarrassing of a situation because it wasn't fair. She didn't know why she was going, and it was just decided upon her. And she did find that it was a racist event, given the context, which it very clearly was. So that's the story of a lot of the themes that were coming out. And some of these themes, there was a few people who talked about it in a post-secondary environment, but it was mainly coming in from a high school environment. In a post-secondary environment, just to give an example, in the quick time that we have left, there was someone who went into a career counselor and asked to be taking extra courses. And they were like, no, you shouldn't. And they had a very high standing GPA. They were well organized. They were well accomplished. And then they left. And in the same vicinity, a white counterpart went to ask the same question, and they were gladly helped and told to do the same thing. So it's very clear that people are seeing the clear difference that white individuals are receiving from Black individuals, especially in a school context. So where does that leave us? It leaves us to needing closer monitoring of school behaviors from teachers. And we talked about it yesterday as well, about like EDI. We can talk about EDI all we want, but it's never going to work unless it's actually implemented and taken into action. So needing to have proper behaviors in the classroom addressed, needing to have more, this was also not captured by one of the major themes, but more representation in the schools, because people felt like they couldn't go seek advice from a superior because there was no Black teachers that they could confide in that would feel like they were supporting them. But it was not captured as much as a major theme, so it wasn't covered here. But again, EDI can be talked about as much as we want, but if it's not actually implemented and not actually done in action, then it's not going to work. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you, everyone.